For those people who just logged in, we're just waiting for a couple more people and we're going to start in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience.
Oh.
Hi, folks. Yes, I'll pay the price. But look how much I gained if I have to. I can face anything. I am strong, strong. I am invincible, invincible. I am forever. Cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor. I know one's ever gonna keep me down again. Oh yes, I'm wise, but it's wisdom for the pain. Oh, yes, I'll pay the price, but look how much I gained if I have to. I can do anything. I am strong, strong. I am invincible, invincible. I am a woman. You can bend but never break me.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here.
More determined to achieve my final goal. And I come back even stronger. Not a novice any longer. 'Cause you
Thank you, Vanessa, for sharing. I want to thank the Feminist Library team for their back-end organising to make tonight possible. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Mina. Thank you, Vanessa. Now let's get started. Welcome to the launch of Misbehaving. Stories of the protest against the women. Stories of the protest against the Miss World contest and beauty industry. My name is Nana, and I'll be stewarding tonight. The release of this book marks the 50th anniversary of the women's liberation movement. This book is a collection of stories from those who took part in the 1970 protests, as well as others who testify that the rampage they saw happen in the Royal Albert Hall on live TV just changed their lives and urged them to join the movement and become feminists. Tonight, we will hear passages from the women themselves. Can I ask the misbehavers to introduce themselves, please? Unmute yourselves and say hello.
Hi, I'm Sue.
Hi, I'm Jenny. Jane, you need to unmute yourself. And Joe, you do too.
Hi, I'm Joe Robinson. Okay.
And I'm Sarah Wilson. We're meant to be doing it in alphabetical order.
You rebels. I was preparing for it. I was ready for it.
Jane is
I'm
there.
Jane. I'm Jane.
Hi, Jane. Hi, Jane.
Hiya.
I've been speaking to the women all week, so I'm warm to be here. Right. Before we explore what happened, we need to put this event into historical context. I'm going to ask Zoe Fairburn, who wrote the intro, if she can read a few lines, because she just sums up the time so well. Zoe, can you unmute yourself, please, and read the intro? Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can, great. Thank you. Shall I start?
Yep.
I feel very honoured, not to say a little fraudulent, excuse me, to be
asked to introduce this event because I wasn't at the Miss World protest in 1970. I wasn't even at the Ruskin Conference in 1970. But I'm here because I want to say a big thank you to those of you who were there and who made things happen at a time when UK patriarchy was still red in tooth and claw. Married men had a legal right to rape their wives. There were no domestic violence centres. There were no rape crisis centres for women who suffered that sort of violence. Many employers openly advertised jobs as being for men only. Sometimes when a job was open to women, the job description would specify, excuse me, the job description would specify that the woman must be attractive. If a woman found that she was being paid less than a man for doing the same job for the same employer, she had no legal redress. Most married women were not allowed to fill in their own income tax return. They had to give their financial information to their husband, who would then fill in the form on the couple's behalf. If any tax rebate was due to the woman, it was usually paid to the man, because women didn't exist as far as the income tax authorities were concerned. Many social security benefits, which were in theory payable to couples or families, were only paid to the breadwinner, which was defined as the man of the family. Contraception was not available on the national health. In some areas, help was available either from charities or local authorities, but in some cases, you could only avail yourself of this if you could prove that you were either married or at least engaged. Now, I could go on, but I'm here to hear from the women who were actually at the Miss World contest, and I'm sure that all of you are as well. And also many of you will remember some of the things I'm saying, and those of you who aren't quite old enough to remember will have heard. But all of the above examples of institutionalized sexism, as well as many others, have now either been abolished or at least modified. And that is due in large part to the energy and the commitment and the activities of the women's liberation activists who decided to change the world in 1970 and who went on inspiring other women to change it right up until now and on into the future. So thank you to all of you. Thank you for inviting me. And let's hear from the misbehavior people. Thank you.
That was brilliant, Zoe. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Excellent. Right. Okay. So I've had this book for a week now, and I've spoken to the women a few times. I always find it empowering to read the origin stories of political movements, especially those organized by women. There's so much rich themes in this book. At times I felt like I was reading somebody's diary. The writing in here is passionate, it's earnest, at times vulnerable, and other times quite cheeky. I got a real sense that a lot of the women found themselves, once they found a tribe that was supportive, their newly found feminist community activated their own agency and allowed the women to engage and resist the politics of the patriarchy. So tonight, we're going to look at how one night changed the trajectory of history. I want to know, Jenny, what happened that night?
Well, we stopped the Miss World contest in front of more than 100 million people worldwide watching on telly.
Okay, right, okay. I know that, right? But for those who don't know much about this protest, why did you do it? Sue, there's a great part in the book where you talk about this. Could you read the section, please?
Yeah. So I want to say thank you to Nana because she's brave enough to host this Wild Women tonight. Thank you. Yeah, it seems so funny. It is exactly, but this time, 50 years ago, we would have been throwing flour off the balcony and leaflets and smoke bombs were going off. Exactly perfect timing. And of course, there are whole new generations of feminists, including my two wonderful daughters. Feminist conferences have thousands of participants now, and the Me Too and Time's Up movements of women against sexual harassment and rape have taken off. But I feel so angry still that we need to campaign. For example, about the 2 women who were killed by their partners each week in England, and that's risen to 3 during lockdown. The many more women who live in fear, the widespread violence against women, so many women's lives ruined by FGM. There's a continuum between women being judged by their look, seen as objects or cattle, and rape and violence against women. I'm angry that the Miss World competition still carries on 50 years later. Even angrier that Donald Trump co-owned and hosted Miss Universe, the American version of Miss World, and used the beauty pageant to boost business interests abroad, getting the 2013 contest hosted by Russia. Contacts he made in Moscow probably helped to give him the presidency, with disastrous effects to women worldwide. 100 years after creative direct action, propaganda by deed, won votes for some women, only a third of MPs are women in the UK. 50 years after we protested against the Miss World competition, just 1.5% of rape cases reported to the police in England result in suspects being summoned or charged. That tiny fraction, only 7.5% of those charges result in a conviction. 80% never get to prosecution. And the Miss World contest carries on. So the reasons we were angry haven't gone away. And what's changed since 1970? Some things, but not nearly enough.
Wow, that's so powerful, Sue. That's so powerful. And also, you came up with this slogan, right? A slogan that's still used now. What does that say? We're not beautiful, we're not ugly, we're angry.
Yes.
So mad. How were you able to organize yourself so efficiently without all the tools that we have now? Jane?
Well, I was going to read an excerpt from about the leaflet, because if people don't have it in front of them, they might have the book, but they don't. I'll answer organizing afterwards from my perspective. The leaflet drew a parallel between ourselves as ordinary women and women in beauty contests. In both, women are judged and judging each other, aiming to please and competing with other women. The leaflet identified Mecca, the founders and organizers of the Miss World pageant, as small fry compared to big business in using our bodies to sell rubbish and robbing us of our sexuality. We were against criticizing or attacking the contestants, but we did address the women in the audience with, "Women watching, why are you here?" The leaflet ended with the slogan that has been associated with the 1970 Miss World protest ever since: "We're not beautiful or ugly, we're angry." In rejecting the binary options of seeing ourselves as beautiful or ugly, we wanted to challenge all the false choices we faced as women in our everyday lives. So that was the leaflet that someone we lived with in the house we shared, Ed, had a Gestetner machine, among other presses, in the basement, and he ran off hundreds. And somehow these got distributed sufficiently so that most people had them in their bags when they came in, under their pregnant bellies or whatever, and had them outside. But that does raise the question of, I can't remember how we actually distributed them, because organization was kind of different then. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have emails, we didn't have mobiles, we didn't all have landlines. So how did it happen? I think the main thing that happened was Ruskin, because out of Ruskin grew, there had been some women's groups before that in London and elsewhere, but not many. And after Ruskin, the numbers of women's groups multiplied, and they became I think there were more than the workshop could actually handle. They became, you know, the main source of communication.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful, both a strength and I think later now a weakness, that although there were general principles about what we were aiming for,
yeah,
and what we wanted to avoid, it was down to local groups to actually organize, plan what to do, what to bring in their bags. So there was a real sense of autonomy within the organization. Meetings, I was at about 3 meetings in the groups that I was associated with. And one thing I particularly liked was the discussions we'd have about, I mean, rather endless, but you know, is it hierarchical for one woman to do the rattle? Or what's the best design for a flower bomb that will have the best scatter of flour? What should we wear? You know, that was something. And things like that, you know, some still groan about those discussions, but I found them exhilarating after some of the kind of planning I'd been involved with before. So I think the organization, apart from bringing it off, we never knew how many people would be inside. To this day, I discover new people, friends at the time, who were inside that I didn't know were inside. And there's photographic evidence to prove it, you know. So it was extremely successful as a kind of, I mean, we could have kept a lot of secrets, you know, because things were really tight in terms of organization. So I'm sure other people who didn't organize directly with us would have other experiences. I don't know if they want to add anything.
Jenny, if you can quickly, yeah.
Very quickly, someone asked me about this yesterday, and you know, how did you do it without mobile phones and social media? And I realized we used to move around the whole time.
Yeah.
Hordes and hordes of us. We used to sleep on each other's floors. We were always between different cities, different universities. So it's funny in these days of COVID, looking back on that and just kind of seeing us as this enormous movement and network of young people who were moving around and talking to each other and visiting all the time.
I can imagine that. I'm just the way that you're describing that is just so powerful. But if we can go back to that night, right? Because that's what this book is about. I want you to paint the picture of that night. Sarah, I haven't heard from you. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
Sarah. Can you paint the picture for me? What happened that night?
Well, a large part of the show was pre-recorded, which is why we had to have somebody give a signal once we knew it was live on air, so we couldn't be cut. So at some stage we were informed that the show was now going to be live on air. This was it. In due course, the women were tidied away, and Bob Hope, the compere of the show, swept down to the wings and took centre stage. He began by reassuring the audience not to worry about the bombing the previous evening. The extra security later on would prevent any trouble. He then got into his stride with cracks about cows and cattle markets, which the contest had been compared to by feminist critics. He said he liked to go backstage and check out the calves. Moo. Strutting about and warming to his subject, he said that whoever was the lucky winning contestant would be taken by him to Vietnam, to be paraded before the GIs fighting there, to give them the hots, all the better to fight the Cong, that is the Viet Cong or the Vietnamese People's Army. Even the audience became uncomfortable and was falling silence. It was time to go. After a whispered discussion, we slid silently out of our seats in the darkness. I made my way down towards the stage and planted myself in the aisle. I turned the football battle furiously on and on for what seemed like forever before there was any response. I felt like the army leader who waves his arm to call his troops to follow him into battle, only to turn round and find there is no longer anyone behind him. He has been deserted and is completely alone, facing the enemy. But in fact, our army of women was right there and raring to go. I learned later that nobody was quite ready and took a while gathering their possessions and lighting their cigarettes to set off the smoke bombs. Then complete pandemonium broke out. Whistles, screams, and shouts were coming from all over the auditorium. The acoustics of the Royal Albert Hall are excellent. The place was ringing with sound. Showers of leaflets were fluttering down from the galleries above. Smoke bombs landed on the stage, smoke rising and spreading up and outwards to mix with the leaflets and the clouds of flour. It was a wonderful spectacle. Bob Hope, after all his bragging about Vietnam, tried to run away. Years later, we learned that Julia Morley, co-owner with her husband of the contest franchise, had prevented this by grabbing his ankle.
That's just listening to that. I can't see myself doing that, right? I'm too cool, right? But also, I'll be terrified. Weren't you scared? Like, what about the contestants? What about the audience? Weren't you scared, Sarah?
Well, people ask me that. Everybody asks me that. I can't remember being scared exactly. I think the adrenaline was pacing so much around my body, and I was completely in the moment and focused. I had this thing to do. I had this, well, one task. I was hoping afterwards to then use all my stuff, and I was near the judges. I was going to take a water pistol full of black ink and spray all their judging papers, possibly them, but unfortunately I spent so long with the rattle. By the way, I do have the rattle here.
Oh, let me see.
Listen,
Okay.
bit loud.
And the acoustic in the Royal Albert Hall, that would have sounded so like...
It was, yes, you can hear it on the YouTube thing. Anyway, so yeah, I think I was just focused on the fact I had this thing to do. And I realized also, I think I'm more nervous about speaking in public. I was thinking about this evening. There I had an action to do, and it was pretty straightforward. I had this sort of one task, but it was a bit daunting to get up all alone in the Albert Hall. It's a massive place, the Albert Hall, if you see it. So it was quite something. And I do look back on it and think, gosh, was that me?
Yeah.
I really do that.
Yeah. Okay, right. Hold on. Joe, did you get arrested? Like, what happened next after the raucous? What happened next?
Well, I didn't get arrested straight away. What happened was I got left behind. Everybody had disappeared. And I was sort of in the Albert Hall, standing there, wondering how I was going to get out. And I looked up. I couldn't go back the way I came in. I just couldn't. So I had to look up and see the stairs. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I just can't believe it. I know the story.
Right? I realised I haven't pressed it. Yeah,
yeah, I know the story, but hearing it from you, it's just like, go on, continue.
Well, I didn't know what to do. So, where was I?
Heading for the exit.
I'm telling about the bouncer. Yeah, I went to try and find a way out, and suddenly this bouncer appeared in front of me and blocked my way. So I looked in my bag, my arsenal, and took out my spray gun and pointed at him, and everybody went, ah! And then I thought, well, I'll just have to pull the trigger. And I did. And I squirted a blue spray of ink that I managed to put all over his white tuxedo. And then it was like a big circle. I thought, maybe I can make it into a woman's sign. And then I went, no, don't be silly. I've got to get going. I want to get out of here.
I just love this, right? Jenny, my dearest Jenny, thank you for that, Joe. That was a brilliant story. My dearest Jenny, I know now you're a grandmother, you know, and you are an architect, and you are in Sheffield living your best life writing. But weren't you arrested at the Royal Albert Hall?
Yeah, and it didn't destroy my life. So in fact, I'd never been so excited in my whole life. I was very young. I was 20. It was my first year at university. But the women's liberation movement had just kind of made sense of my life, really. And so I was so excited when it all actually happened, because we'd been sitting there for hours and hours, it seemed like, interminable Bob Hope, terrible jokes. And I really felt, oh, no, you know, they've chickened out. It's not going to happen. I was with the Essex girls sitting up on the balcony with a big panorama of the whole Albert Hall. And we really did think they've chickened out. It wasn't going to happen. And oh, we'll just have to go home. And then suddenly, Sarah's football rattle. It was very faint because we were so high up and the Albert Hall was huge. You just heard this faint grinding noise. And then, could that be it? And then all hell let loose. And it was just so exciting. And it felt like it was going on for hours, but I think it probably went on for 5 minutes. And
10 minutes.
I felt this heavy hand on my shoulder, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw this blue uniform and this voice, "Come on, you, out with you." And 2 burly policemen carried me out, down the stairs, out of the hall, and into the waiting police van.
Oh, Lord. The other night when we were having our catch up, you told me that you had an epiphany when, you know, when you were arrested, you had an epiphany about defending yourself. If you can remember, can you repeat what you told us to me? It was really quite powerful.
I don't know whether to read it out or not. Should I? It's probably better for people if I kind of say it, I think.
Say it. Let them buy the book. Please buy the book. It's a book launch. Go on, yeah.
So, as I said, I was 20. I knew nothing. And suddenly I was this figurehead. You know, I was a woman who'd been arrested at the Miss World contest. It had been on the front pages of all the national press, and it was a big, big scandal, basically. And suddenly there was me. And the Women's Liberation Workshop was full of these amazing women, many of whom are here tonight, you know, really talented women just on the cusp of breaking through, writers and actors and filmmakers. And the Women's Liberation Workshop decided that those of us who've been arrested should defend ourselves in court. And I don't know if any of you in the audience here saw the Mangrove 9 trial on television on Sunday. Fantastic film by Steve McQueen, where it shows 2 of the Mangrove 9 defending themselves. Marcus Howe, Marcus
Howe.
Thank you. And I can't remember the name of the other guy, but I was taken to visit them in their office, the Black Panther office above the Mangrove restaurant. And they did talk about how powerful it is to defend yourself and how good they felt speaking for themselves, speaking their own words, challenging the court, questioning their witnesses direct. And I was being kind of encouraged by my family to play it good, play it nice, be a nice girl, get a lawyer. They'd buy me a new winter coat, tell them, you know, that I'd been led astray by a bunch of hippies. And I remember distinctly having to go and sit on a very cold park bench in Islington and sat there for hours trying to make my mind up. And I going to play it safe, go back to university, continue with my career, or am I going to stand up and speak for the women's liberation movement in court? And it just felt like my place was with the movement and the commune that was sheltering me, where all of these 4 women were living. It was just full of, as I said, you know, it seemed like the whole world was traveling around and meeting each other and supporting each other. There was draft dodgers from Vietnam. There was women from Ireland coming to stay so they could get an abortion. There was such an atmosphere of support, and we were going to do it. And yeah, in the end, I decided to defend myself, and it was the best decision of my life. It was totally empowering, totally exciting.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to stop you.
I just want to add to that.
Yes, go on, Jo.
I want to add to that
Go
because
on.
I have the same thing about, you know, what to do about this court case and how to fight it. And we had some free help offered by barristers. And when we said to them, you know, we want to sort of take the court on, and we want to talk about women's liberation and what our ideas were. I said that the act itself, a breach of the peace, is all worded in the name of men. It says he all the way through. It doesn't say she. So how can we be prosecuted for that? And she said she wasn't prepared to, she liked the idea of the gendered language and questioning it, but she wasn't prepared to take us on in court and say what we wanted. So I thought, well, the barristers will never say what we wanted to say, because we want to question the whole structure of the court and the whole structure of society and everything. They're never going to do that. So the only thing we can do is to defend ourselves. And I'm so glad we did, because that's what gave strength to what we did and what we believed in.
That was powerful. I feel like I should clap. Like, that was powerful. Wow. Wow. I'm just. What did you say, Jo?
I said, have we thrown you?
You have, right? Because I can't believe. I mean, look, I'm in my 30s, and I know how brilliant my generation is. But you were all so young, right? When it comes to life experience, not age, but life experience, right? But to have that insight, to defend yourself, but also I still reading the book, there was some cheeky, immature behavior. I think you're calling the judge Daddy-O. Jo, can you read the section where you're calling the judge Daddy-O?
Oh yes, we did.
I think page.
Because we questioned the authority of the court so much at every opportunity that we decided to call the magistrate Daddy-O. I'm not sure about the O, but I think we called him Daddy anyway. We refused to conform to the expectations, to his expectations, and we shouted out quite a lot and quite loud, and we laughed, and we were outlandish really, and we tried to hold up the proceedings whenever we could. So the magistrate started out as a comic uncle, but he got crosser and crosser with us. And finally, he stated that there were to be no more objections, or he said, banging down his gavel, we would be sent down for the night. I did not heed this, much to everyone else's anxiety. I found yet another objection. The minute I made it, he interrupted with his gavel. Down for the night! The police surrounded us. They tried to grab me, but once again, I used the toilet excuse. A pregnant woman's right to choose. And on his refusal, I squatted down. The police moved forward, but Sue, wonderful Sue, came to my defense. We were carted off for the night in a police van for B&B in Holloway Prison to be taught a lesson. But it was another kind of lesson that night, to witness the conditions we saw for women in prison.
Oh.
It reminded us how we were nearly all quite well-educated middle-class women, and we saw the other side of life that really changed my life.
Oh, I mean, we'll get onto it, but like I said, I said to you all personally, the book kept on proving me right, proving me wrong, you know, like, and even though it's not an academic book, right, I do think that there needs to be some, there needs to be a curriculum or syllabus about it. It's just really important. But I wanted to, I don't know, I just find it, I don't understand how 10 minutes, a 10-minute protest, right? Or 9 0.25, right? But 10-minute protest sparked a 50-year movement. And so many women became feminists. You know, some may be here tonight. The chat box is really buzzing, right? Let me have a look to see if there's anybody here tonight. Wow. Oh, wow. I'm going to save this chat box because this is brilliant. And I know that in the book, there are a few women who talk about, you know, seeing the incident on TV and how it changed their lives. I'm going to read a section from Lynn Siegel. I don't know if Lynn's here tonight, but if you are, hello, good evening. So Lynn writes this in the book. I was not at the event as I'd only arrived in London 3 weeks before. However, I recall reading the slim pamphlet about the event and the trial as soon as it appeared. And I say it was the first thing that really turned me on to feminism. So moving and exciting, and of course, I never looked back. Now, Sarah, where are you, Sarah? I can't see you. You still there?
Yes. Well,
I think. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I think for a lot of people, they assume that, you know, that protest was the beginning, but for all lovers of history, you would know there were rumblings and there was other protests going on from 68 to 69. Do you want to mention something about that?
Well, yes, there had been demonstrations, at least in 1969, outside the Royal Albert Hall. There'd been demonstrations against the beauty contest, but nobody had ever gone in to break it up. That was what we aimed to do. And there have been protests in America, in the States. As with a great many of our movements, they often began in the States, the civil rights movement for the Black people in the States, but in Ireland it was for the Catholics, the civil rights movement. I think there was quite a lot that was inspired, that began over there. So yes, there had been, and then, but Ruskin was the watershed really, the feminist conference in February in Ruskin College. Organised by Sally Alexander and others. And Annie Freud was there. She spoke. She was here this evening.
Oh, wow.
Well, who else was I can't remember who the other organisers were, but it was a huge event. And of course, the two women who initiated, Jan Williams and Hazel Twort from the Peckham Women's Group, both had two small daughters, and both of them are sadly dead now, but they actually initiated the Miss World concert, the demonstration that we took part in. They got up at a meeting later in the year, I think in September, and said they were planning this. And if anyone was interested, go to a meeting at a house near Victoria. And I went down there, and there were only 5 of us at the first meeting, and we were quite disappointed. But we thought, well, even 5 people can be quite disruptive, you know, up in the gallery with leaflets and smoke bombs and flower bombs and things. So we bought our 5 tickets, and the next meeting was held at the commune I lived in, the one Jenny was talking about, where all sorts of people were coming and going all the time. And word spread like that. Yes, it just spread by word of mouth, and through women's groups as well. There were many small, that began with Ruskin. As a result of Ruskin, there were small consciousness-raising groups sprung up all over London like mushrooms in a way, of women talking about their experiences as women. And that was a huge network of communication, really.
Yeah.
It was the great thing.
Yeah. But
Yes.
go on, Joe.
I think
I've just seen, can I just, sorry,
that's the
I've just
crux
seen
of-
that the
Word.
daughters.
Going.
Yeah.
I think that's the crux of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Ruskin put the fire into our bellies That's what set us off.
Yeah.
I went to the Albert Hall today and I nearly cried when I spoke, because we went to talk about, this is a wonderful day today to celebrate like what happened that night. And it just made tears come up in my mind at the thought of like how we went there. We were fired. We had fire in our belly about, you know, women's liberation, and it came from Ruskin College. That's what set it off. That's where we got our energy and our ideas from communicating together for the first time as women, bearing our souls and telling us each other what it was really like. And that's what we discovered, and that's what gave us the strength. And it's left me there for the rest of my life, inspired by that conference and the events afterwards.
I felt that, right? It was so powerful. This fire actually changed policy, changed laws. Jenny, like you mentioned before, how it wasn't just like a protest, right? It's what happened after the protest. Can you say some more about the laws?
Yeah, so the protest kind of caught a lot of women's imagination, and it was a kind of symbolic event, and it reached so many women, and the women's liberation movement was just extraordinary. I mean, we just decided we weren't having it anymore, basically, and we went ahead and changed the way we lived. We decided what we wanted to do, and we just went ahead and did it. If we wanted to build a house, we built a house together. I know a lot of women who actually built houses. We decided whether or not we wanted to have children, and we fought for the right to have contraception and abortion clinics, which we know can easily be taken away from us again. We just simply went ahead and taught ourselves how to do what we wanted to do. And the essence of the movement, it was so powerful because it was all about mutual empowerment, supporting each other, learning how to trust our own instincts, self-determination. And that was the essence of the movement that really began to change the world, I think, for all women, how we experienced it. And I just want to say, we know how easily it can be taken away from us. You know, just look at what's happening with abortion in Poland. And so it is that importance of really empowering each other and supporting each other that we, you know, as Joe says, it's kind of deep in us now. It's the fire in our belly. Yeah, and some, you know, I felt like crying, Joe, at quite a lot of things. You know, even like Sarah was saying, she cried when she heard Helen Reddy. You might think it's nostalgic, but it's still so part of us, I think, that women's liberation movement.
We even wanted to change our children's names.
To what?
I think we felt so empowered when we had our children. Sue and I had to go to the registry office and register them, and we said we'll have to put down the father's surnames, and we were separated. So we went, well, why should we have to give a child a patriarchal name anyway? We don't want that. But then we thought, well, why should they have to have a matriarchal name anyway? So then we thought, well, in that case, why can't we just give a child their own name? And we found out you go to the registry office and you could give a child any name. So we said, well, what name? And Sue went in her magic way, Wild, she said. And so our children are all called Wild, all the children we had. But then 50 other people, families copied that name in all over the place. So that's how inspired we felt. We thought, you know, we could change lineage as well as courts and everything. We got carried away, but anyway, it lives on.
It's so powerful to hear that. And but if I can pivot, when I was listening to you all talking about all women being liberated, right? As an African woman, as an African woman. And we had a really juicy conversation about this that was couched in love, but I had to provoke, as an African woman, the myth of this protest was, growing up, coming here in the 90s, I was told that a group of English white women tried to stop the night that, was a historical night for 2 Black women. For those who don't know, the runner-up was Miss Africa South, right? And she had to go back to a country still in apartheid, where women's liberation was as necessary as Black liberation. So for many Black women, we have 2 or 3 battles. If it's the patriarchy, white supremacy, let alone don't be queer, right? don't have a disability, and be in the right class system. So reading this book triggered some questions within. Questions that I don't think tonight's the night to answer. I really feel like this book deserves a syllabus, deserves an unpacking. Maybe next year we can have another program. But I was asking myself, who gets to misbehave?
Yes.
Who gets to be angry, right?
Yes.
Could I be arrested and still get a job afterwards? 50 years ago and even now, right? What did you say, Sarah?
I said that's a very good point.
And it's just questions for now for us to sit with it. I know it's a joyous night, but I would be denying who I am, right? Because you're liberating me, right? If I didn't pose these questions. And for me, like what's most important is, what can contemporary British feminism learn about race from these stories? Jane, just like the other women, your story was just so powerful. Can you help me understand if you were aware of the racial element at that time? I know you were all young, and you're not from the UK. Yeah, go on.
Well, yeah, to some extent. I mean, certainly all of us were, insofar as, understanding we were white privileged people, and being anti-racist as far as we understood what anti-racism was, went on demonstrations, supported, were friends with, but we had no Black women in our women's group, which I think would have made a difference, but maybe not, because a Black woman could identify more, say, as a lesbian than want to be in a Black group. But those understandings about intersectional stuff were to come with growing up a bit more, and also moving a little bit away from the first swoosh of the women's movement, which was so powerful that I'll just give you my response to it truly being a historical moment. A winner and a runner-up both being Black for the first time. Did I care? Did I think it mattered? Well, insofar as I thought this is a finger to, anti-apartheid and the white establishment, but that was really it, because it was still a beauty contest. It was still, women were still getting exploited, humiliated, objectified, whatever their color. How could this be good? Such a contest just, fed the kind of misogynist, patriarchal machine. How can that be good? How can it be celebrated? We did think, some people, this might represent an opportunity for people. We went, tried to imagine that, because we still couldn't imagine why any woman would join into it, come into it. But, there may be perks. So what are the perks? Getting groped by the sponsors, or worse, as we hear about contests around the world. Is it going to Vietnam as a death mascot with Bob Hope? So basically, they didn't go very far, understandings of how a Black woman might feel winning in a contest where the standards of beauty were totally Eurocentric. On the other hand, it's only recently that discussion has come into it. I mean, we have, relatively recently, Toni Morrison has educated us so much about what that might feel like, So it's just what anti-racism is about. It's understanding and peeling away things.
Yeah, but it's so this is why, like I said, this book was triggering me, because how can I deny your truth, right? How can I deny the truth? I think, Sarah, you used this analogy, you were all in a fog of unawareness. Is that correct?
What I felt I was. I don't know how that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Other people all
Fair
see
comment.
what they were doing and were very articulate and expressed all sorts of things. And I was sort of sitting there with my eyes wide open, I still feel a bit like that, I have to say. My whole life has been a learning curve.
There's a brilliant, I know, and we don't have time to go into it, but when people buy this book, right, there's a brilliant story. You talk about going to Cuba for the first time and meeting all of these, politically charged people. And you met a Ghanaian man, right? I'm a Ghanaian. And the Ghanaian man was like, where are all the Black people in this place? And he took you out the compound to go and find the Black people. And when I read the story, I was just giggling, because I was like, yeah, that's what we do. Because we're like, what's going on here?
I haven't even noticed how we hitched into Havana. More and more people, because that was the form of travel anyway in Cuba, still is, I think. You hitched around, and lots of people from the camp started hitching in the afternoon into Havana, and he and I hitched into Havana. But he was asking everybody, why are there no Black people in the positions of power in Cuba? Where are they? Because there were Black people there, but they were not.
Because we would do it, I mean, as women, when we're in male-dominated spaces, we would be like, well, what's going on? Because we know brilliant, smart, sharp women. But I'm conscious of time, and I still want to get some questions in. So we'll give another 10 minutes, because I still have some questions. So okay, right. No, let's try it. I'm trying to think, maybe we'll wrap it up, because I do want the audience to ask you a few questions. Right, so 50 years on, we find ourselves at a tipping point where the past just won't do, right? And we're kind of like not ready for the future. It's a space of limbo. I don't know if it's just this year, but we're just a space of limbo. We find ourselves in a pandemic, and have all become really dependent on social platforms. I mean, I appreciate it. Everybody's here, so thank you. But Jenny, there's a chapter in this book towards the end where you connect the dots between then and now. Are you happy to read a bit of that chapter for me, please?
Yeah, thanks, Nana, because we really wanted to kind of bring the whole issue up to date, so that I think what I said to you, Nana, it just suddenly popped into my head, like, we don't want to be these little feminist dolls sitting on the mantelpiece and, ooh, aren't they cute? We're still the same fighters, and we're still trying to understand what's going on for women. And I kind of offered to write the chapter that was going to bring up to date, what's happening with the beauty industry now. And it suddenly just all started falling into place. So if it's not too boring for people, I'll just read out a very short piece. So the beauty industry has found its dream machine in surveillance technology. Access to the personal data of billions of internet users. So, probably most people here know about Cambridge Analytica and how they manipulated the Brexit result. The machinery of psychological profiling, targeting and manipulation is now being constructed on a global scale via data extraction that mines ever deeper into our personal lives. Global media networks are being used to shape human behaviour on a scale undreamt of before. The pinnacle of achievement for the advertising industry is to deliver predictable outcomes and hence predictable profits. And global finance markets are now, and have for a long time practiced gambling on these future sales and profits. And in 2019, last year, annual sales of the top 5 cosmetic brands were announced as now being bigger than the car manufacturing industry in the UK. And that made me want to kind of think about, right, we know there's going to be a big economic slump, global economic slump as a result of the pandemic. And looking into it, I found this phrase, the lipstick effect. So the lipstick effect is when people can't afford a more expensive item, you know, a bit of new furniture or whatever it is that people spend a bit of money on. And when they can't afford a more expensive luxury item, they'll buy a cosmetic that gives us a feeling of experiencing a bit of luxury and change. So this means that a lot of pressure is going to continue to be exerted via the surveillance industry, particularly on young women, but on all young people. Increasingly, young men are using cosmetics, and statistically, 20 to 24-year-olds are the highest spenders on cosmetics. So there's a kind of link between what's happening with the pandemic and what's happening with the pressure being stepped up to buy from the beauty industry.
Wow, thank you, Jenny. So, before we move on, what advice, or what would you say to new activists who are protesting and finding ways to rebel against the system, right? I mean, it's not the younger generation, but like new activists, regardless of what age and what stage. Do you have any advice for them, Jane?
Keep it up.
Perfect.
I mean, yeah, I don't, yeah, I'll leave it at that, because I hope we've discussed that.
Yeah. Also, when I told some of my younger siblings that I was going to be talking to you, they were like, oh, great, right? You know, and the advice that they were all asking is, you know, the question they were all asking was, do you have any advice for the next generation? Sue, what next, right? What next?
My favourite answer to that question was we went to hear Angela Davis talking at the Women of the World Festival, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And she said, over to you. I'd love to hear what everybody else who's been so patiently listening for the last hour thinks. But also, as you say, there are amazing women doing amazing things all around us at the moment. There's a whole lot happening. But yeah, I would love it if now we could turn to questions or contributions from everybody else who's
Perfect. Let's do that.
joined us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anybody else? Sorry, I was echo there. Does anybody else have answers to that question, what next, right? And if you don't, I'm going to hand it over to Emily. Emily, do you have any questions?
Hello, everybody. I'm so honored to be here tonight with you. So I've just got a list of questions here that have been posted into the chat box, and I'm just going to read them out in order. Please feel free, continue posting questions and we'll get through them. The first one that we've got is from Una Bryan, and she's asking, I think this might be a broad question for all the ladies. If either of you want to jump in, feel free. But she's asking, I'd like to know how long it took to plan from the initial idea to the night.
I think it was about, I think it was only October to December.
Yeah,
Well, end of November.
It was quick.
It was very quick.
Yeah.
I almost think that with these sort of things, if you put too much thought into it, it's not going to happen. Sometimes you catch a moment.
Yeah. That was the beauty of not having social media.
Yeah.
We just acted together as a team. It was teamwork.
Exactly. So also Jenny is asking, Jenny Fortune is asking, I think it was, she suggested, Sarah knows when the meeting was when you first suggested doing it. Okay. So Rich has asked a question. That night in prison, Joe, do you remember Sally Alexander?
No. She wasn't there.
She was.
Sally Alexander?
Yeah, she was in prison with us.
Okay. Well,
She
perhaps
was-
anyway. Lenny Wild is asking the question. I loved what you were saying about your last name Wild. Like that was really, really beautiful to me. So Lenny's asking, can we hear from each of the women about how they have continued the spirit of the protest since the contest and what they're still fighting against?
Wow. That's a big question. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a big question when you do it, Sue.
I think we are still fighting against sexism in so many ways, but we've also moved in different ways so that, for example, for me, I've become more active around women in peace, just because that's very important. And I think we went through, helping people to squat, campaigning about benefits, working for me always about trying to get more early education for children, trying to get childcare so that women could get on with their lives as well as have children. Each one of us has campaigned in different ways, but always kept in contact with each other. So that there's a connection between them. But I think the others should come in if you like. Yeah.
Well, my activism was more related to maternity care when I finally settled into kind of full-time work as a midwife. And yes, campaigning with a radical midwives group, but also in work, in teaching, introducing modules about the relevance of feminism to childbirth and care, childbirth care. Things about, it sounds, kind of pale, but, things about representation and pushing for different images, including all the women who came to the clinic on the walls. And I think, I feel quite proud of some of the work we did in our work. Yeah.
Amazing. So Chloe Grant is asking the question. Susan Bioletta is asking the question, were you aware of the action at the Miss America pageant in the US in Atlantic City? I'm not sure if
Yes.
we're aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. As Sarah said, I mean, we were kind of on their shoulders, stood on their shoulders in many ways. But I mean, the American feminists were, I think for those of us who were living in the commune together, certainly at the start of the commune, it was very much about, American feminist writers and the kind of rhetoric was so powerful. And so yes, we knew about the 1968
Okay.
one.
I'm imagining this commune as a serious hoot right now. I've got some amazing images in my mind. So Chloe Grant is asking, what part of your feminist action are you most proud of? Example, maybe planning, execution, and is there anything that you would do differently if you did it again?
Yeah.
The best thing, the strongest feature was that it was spontaneous, but relying on total teamwork, that we couldn't even communicate with each other. It was the silent communication in that hall, but yet we worked out a plan that was efficient enough to serve us that night and get us through it, because we just did it spontaneously and teamwork, and it's like a guerrilla attack. It was as planned as that, in sort of getting just the right moments, but without being able to communicate with each other. That was the magic of it, and we found out how to do it. That was what was brilliant.
I think if we had to learn one thing we could have done better would have been to have some kind of idea about publicizing afterwards.
Yeah,
because this is the first chance in a way we've had to talk about it properly. So thank you again to the Feminist Library. But I think we didn't really think ahead to what were we going to, how are we going to talk to newspapers? We just didn't do that.
Yeah.
Well, we will. Oh, by the way, can you hear me? Because two people have written
Yes.
so they couldn't hear.
Yes, stay close to the screen.
Okay.
I'm just.
We all moved on and did other things. We didn't have television. We didn't read about ourselves. We were really on a high because it had been so successful. But we were doing a great many other things, helping people squat, homeless people. The social services used to send all the cases they couldn't help to our house and say, oh, go up there. They've got a claimants union and they'll squat if you can't get housed by the council, they'll squat you somewhere. And so we're doing loads of other things. And I think it was only, well, for me, it gradually dawned on us how many people had been influenced by that night over the years, really over the decades. That it's come together.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. I just wanted to check in with Jenny if there's something that you wanted to add to that.
Hi. Well, actually, I just noticed in the chat somebody said, "Can we hear about Jenny and Sarah and Joe's activism since?" So I just wanted to say something about, when I talked about the kind of turning point of my life that it was to defend myself in court, I think it kind of epitomised both the demonstration and the women's liberation movement, that I think we started to feel we could do anything. And it was a bit magical, really. You just decided you were going to do something and you went ahead and did it with the support of other women, which gave us such confidence. And for me, I think as a result of squatting, because I was living in a huge estate in East London, and I was kind of really aware of housing, really, and what was wrong with housing. And our squatting communities were a bit like what they call sustainable communities now, you know, where people were looking after children together, running food co-ops, mending houses, learning all sorts of skills. And I met, as I said before, I met women who actually designed and built their own houses. And it kind of made me feel I wanted to do something like that. And I wanted to be a designer and a technician and an inventor. And I applied to do architecture at university and did it. And I think that was pretty amazing. And that's thank you to the women's liberation movement, really. And I think we achieved extraordinary things, all of us, and I think we can continue to do that with the support of each other, with that mutual empowerment.
Maybe even more so now that we're also connected digitally.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So Carol Vincent would like to add something.
Sorry.
Hi, Carol. Are you with us? Oh, maybe Carol's speaker is off.
I was going to talk a little bit about me afterwards. I moved to France in the early 80s, to southwest France near Toulouse, and I became involved later with women's groups in Toulouse. It was a very strong women's movement in Toulouse. We had a group in solidarity with Algerian women who had had to flee, journalists and writers and intellectuals who had had to flee from Algeria, from the FIS, which was a very fundamentalist Islamic group. Quite a lot of women were killed. So that was one of the things I was doing. But before I went to France, I'd been involved for a long time with Ireland and the civil rights movement in the north of Ireland. from even before the women's movement, from poster workshop days. I went over there. But I continued to be in touch with them. And of course, women there, the men were quite macho, to put it mildly. So a lot of the women were sort of struggling, let's say, on two fronts, fighting the British and fighting for women's rights, and probably, weren't even legally able to have abortions for decades, really. So that was two of the things I was involved with. And the Greenham Common, somebody asked about that. I moved to France quite early on, but I was on the march organised by Anne Pettit and other people that went from Cardiff to Greenham Common to publicise it. And nobody had heard. And then I went to London. We walked for 10 days. The press were completely uninterested. I tried to ring the press and they'd sort of say, Greenham Common, no, what's that? Where is it? Cruise missiles, never heard of them. Doesn't mean no, sorry, not interested. And that was why women chained themselves to the fence and stayed put until it became a global issue, basically. But again, it takes perseverance, a lot of these things. We were Miss World, it was lucky. I mean, 5-10 minutes and it was all over the world. But a lot of things you just have to keep plugging at it and going on and on and on. So I hope you were able to hear that. Was it audible?
Yeah, that was perfectly audible. Thank you. Oh, Joe, are you adding something? Oh, I think you're on mute, Joe.
Mute. I want to answer that one about afterwards. I was very rewarding going into schools and talking to young women about beauty in relation to the Miss World beauty contests and their own views nowadays on beauty. And they came up with quite a few ideas at the end. And one of them was they realised the importance of self-worth, the need to help one another and stick it out together. And that power in the media is largely male and it needs to be women in positions of power. And our generation have to step up and change things. And the final was ban beauty pageants. So it was interesting going to schools and working with young people to hear how they were dealing with the problem of beauty, because we haven't even talked about the myth of beauty, the whole myth of it, which is tied into the beauty industry now. And as long as we, aim for that, we've had it. We haven't even talked about the beauty myth. That is the biggest problem with this whole thing. I'll leave it as a problem.
Thank you.
We could definitely, we could talk about this for such a long time. I'm just going to touch on some of these other questions because there's been some really brilliant things that have been asked in the chat. Pam Davis has asked a really important question, I think, which is, do you welcome anyone who identifies as a woman into the women's movement?
I didn't hear that, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Pam Davis has asked, do you welcome anyone who identifies as a woman into the women's movement?
Oh.
Well, we've had many debates between ourselves about this, when I don't think we can answer as one here.
Okay, yep, that's fine. Thank you for being honest. Zena has asked a brilliant question. So much of our lives have been privatized and rendered for sale since those events in 1970. And in this respect, have the core values of liberation and women's liberation as a part of that been defeated?
What was the first bit? By core values? What was the first bit? So much.
So she's saying, so our lives have been privatized and rendered for sale since those events in the 1970s. So since that, have the core values of liberation and women's liberation been defeated if our lives are being privatized and rendered for sale?
I think it would be really great if everybody in the audience, or not the audience, everybody who's joining in this debate should join in, not just have the five of us answer. These are fabulous questions, but they're
help.
I'd like to say the battle continues, really.
Hiya, I'm unmuted now, I think. It's Carol.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I didn't know anybody that was there, apart from a couple of women I'd met at a folk club, and also a peace group, which I believed was in Hertfordshire somewhere. And I went there one night in a car and so on. And but I didn't get there very often because I was still at school and having to swat a bit. But I fell into being there by mistake. You know, I used to sit and watch the Miss World contest with my mum and dad and brothers and so on. But I remember that my dad, a really working class East End bloke from Stepney, used to say, what the bleeding hell are they showing that for? Going up their legs. Why do they need to look at their crutch? It's not a bloody crutch contest, is it? You know, and my mum would go, well, I don't know, I don't even know. And, you know, one of my brothers once walked past and said, oh, well, don't watch it then. There's an off button. But there wasn't much else to do. It was a bit of a novelty then, and we were the last to get a telly anyway. But I think, you know, I was already kind of het up. My dad was at Cable Street, the Battle of Cable Street. I was born in the East End at Brick Lane, and, you know, and I lived in a multicultural, multi-faith community, and there'd been lots of agitation over many years, the match women and so on. And my mum was a seamstress, you know, and she did homework. We painted little soldiers and had to do 1,000 to get a quid or something, you know. But my point was that there was something in me from very early on, but there weren't the avenues to get it out. And we were moved as part of slum clearance of the East End to Harlow in Essex. And I did most of my schooling there. And I went with my brother to a folk club. I looked a bit older than I was, and I was interested in creating things and drama and all sorts, and music. And this is where I met these older, still young women, but they were in their 20s, and I was sort of 15, 16. And it was, I got chatting to them and so on and so forth, and they said they belonged to the peace group. I was already doing stuff around getting anti-fox hunting and getting animals liberated from laboratories and all that business. And my mum and dad would often say, don't you bloody get arrested, girl, or else. I never knew what the else or else was. And I think they were quite proud of me, really. I'm a lifelong vegetarian. And what I did do was when a phone call came, and it's in the book, actually, when the phone call came from this woman, Lizzie, and she said, listen, one of the girls can't go to the Albert Hall. Would you fancy going to the Albert Hall? And I went, oh, yeah, that's a bit posh. You know, I don't know if I've got any clothes for it. And my mum, of course, was a seamstress. By that time, she was a tailoress. And she basically said she'd make something, and what an opportunity. And then they said it was for the Miss World contest. And I went, oh, I don't know if my dad will like that, though. You know, I don't know if he'd be very happy with that. But they went, no, we're going to disrupt it. And I thought, yes, that's it. I'm going to create some hell for a change. And that's exactly what we did. We travelled on the 339 Worley bus up to Epping and got the tube from Epping and then trotted along. And then it was just chaos. There were police vans. My heart was pumping. I'd got this kind of psychedelic-y long sleeve thing on and these loon trousers, and my hair was all out here. And in fact, on the tube, one of the women who we was with, I didn't really know, it was one of their friends. I'd got all this Bieber makeup on, you know, with long eyelashes and all the eyeliner up here and all the rouge and stuff, and my hair and some sequiny things. And she went, what the bloody hell you got on your face? Get that muck off. I said, you sound like my dad. He says that, get that muck off. I said, but it's me. It's my style. I like it. And I think that was it. I'm an individual and that's my style. And I think that, you know, I took little notice of her, but we went in and I was just told, when you're told, when there's the signal, we're unfurling the banner and you get up and make as much noise as possible. So they had I think it was a broom handle that had been cut in half or something and screwed. And one of them had got it down her sleeve or somewhere, and then they'd unfold the thing and put it down. You know, you were saying about being pregnant. It was all around the front there. And then we sat down, and they wanted to be near an aisle. And I think our tickets were further in, which was a nuisance, but no one would move. Anyway, there were about 5 or 6 of us together, and all of a sudden there was this like tinny noise. I didn't realize it was a football rattle, and suddenly out come this thing and furled, and we were trying to get these things to lift it up, and one part of it got up, and then the next thing there was flour and there was things coming from everywhere, and it was just the most exciting thing for a 16-year-old girl to be doing, who had come from the East End of London, who was poor and had got brothers, and I hadn't got a sister or anything. It was just the most empowering, wonderful thing. And I've gone on, this is my nosy son, I've gone on to do the most, what I think is amazing things. I lived at Greenham Common for a while, partly because I was homeless, so I'd nowhere to go with my kids. So we went to Greenham, but the camaraderie and the don't get me wrong, there was a lot of aggravation there as well, because women, when they get together, especially when they're a bit menstrual, can be all sorts of antics going on. But we, 9 miles of a perimeter surrounded by women saying, no, you're not staying here. We don't want war, we want peace. And these missiles don't belong to us and we'll become a target. And lots of peace groups and people bringing us things. It was just wonderful. And there were some very important men around as well, supporting us. I mean, I remember, I would not have got to a Welsh coalfield during the miners' strikes if it hadn't been for some men coming and towing me and my kids and our car up this bloody mountain, it felt like, to be able to get to the community centre where we were taking stuff. My daughter actually died in 2014, and she had hated going. I'd pack up the car and go after school on a Friday for the weekend or something. And she used to hate blooming going. But actually, just before she died, she said to me, do you know, Mum, some of the best times of my life were when we packed the car up and we went off, and we just got to sort of Wales or Nottingham or wherever it was we was going, and we got all the stuff out of the car, and there were people just so grateful. She said, I never realised how amazing that was. She said, but I feel so fortunate I was involved in it and that you was my mum taking me. And that meant so much to me, because kids do grumble, but actually, to be involved in that, she was very grateful. And I think all women everywhere who stand up against things and who push the boundaries, who challenge things, need to be embraced. And I think, be who you are, say what you want, do what you want, and don't let the bastards get you down. And if you're challenged, challenge back, ask questions, get the answers. And if there aren't any answers that you can find, go after the answer, quest. And that's what I try to teach my grandchildren now, and coming up, my great-grandchildren. So thanks, ladies. I'm sure the women I went with were inspired by you, and everyone that was at the college. And you did all those meetings and preparations, and it changed my life. It really did. And I think you all need to be on a plaque somewhere at the Royal Albert Hall, actually.
Carol, this is you talking.
And we did it.
Carol, you talking about being 16, like, is bringing so, I'm thinking of myself at that age, and I can't even imagine what it would have been like. And somebody's asked a question in this box, actually, which made me think of a time when I was 16, which is hilarious. So Al Johnson has asked an important question, which is, many of us who have been activists since the 70s have been proud to call ourselves feminists. And do you think that younger women are reluctant to call themselves feminists? But I
don't. I'm just going to answer this very quickly because I've spoke too much, but I don't. My granddaughter is 18, and she calls herself a feminist. And she has pictures of Angela Davis, and she has pictures of me with placards and Black Lives Matter things. And she is very proud to be a feminist. Yes.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Does anybody else have anything to add? Or maybe somebody from the audience would like to comment on that, because that's a really interesting thing, I think, for me, hearing about this story and like the intergenerational differences and why, you know, this was such an important event for us now. I just think that's a really brilliant question about younger women calling themselves feminists. So Una Bryan has also asked, what do you think our focus as feminists should be now? And if there was one amazing action that we should do, what would it be?
One amazing action.
Maybe in your wildest dreams, what would you do if you could?
I think I'm throwing that to everybody else in the room that hasn't yet had a chance to speak.
Yeah.
Someone who hasn't yet spoken should answer this one.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we can leave that one as a rhetorical question for the thinking about. Of, you know, in our wildest daydreams, if there was one thing that we could do.
Joe.
Oh, Joe, you wanting to say something? Oh, you're on mute.
Joe, you're on mute.
Can't help.
Oh, okay. We'll get back to you. So Teresa has asked a brilliant question as well. This really made me smile. Ola, my 7-year-old daughter, who's with me here, wants to know how she can be a 7-year-old feminist and get all her friends to join her gang.
Great question.
I think, is it Hina that's answered that in the chat line, saying there's some brilliant books for young feminists? I think that's true. There's books on Mary Wollstonecraft and books on, like, let's think, Frida Kahlo. There's a whole series aimed at pretty much 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
Is that the one you meant, Hina? Oh.
Okay, so I'm just going to move on to our last question. Carrie McGiven has asked, do you still feel sisterhood with each other and with other women?
Much of the time, yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And still powerful sisterhood.
So I was asked that question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was asked that question by this journalist on the Independent yesterday. Well, she actually said, "Are you still friends with each other?" And I said, "Yeah, most definitely." And you know that. Well, you can tell by the amount of people here, but yeah, those networks I think are still very. The networks that were created during that time, and I think we're enormously lucky to have them. But I do feel that there's a general culture being fostered nowadays where people are quick to criticize each other, and I think that's very destructive within feminism. You know, I think we've really got to look at the need that what I was talking about before, we need to support each other. We need to empower each other. We really need to listen to each other. And I'm trying very hard to do that. You know, I'm not the best person at listening. And I think that is such an important thing. And I think that's kind of a big part of what the women's liberation movement was all about, that we were learning to listen to each other's truths. And I think we really need to highlight that in these days. I think there's a bit too much sniping going on, to tell you the truth.
Should I say something?
I agree, Jenny.
I completely agree with Jenny. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we did have our share of rows and arguments during the women's liberation movement. I mean, it was not all sweetness and light.
Yes.
But I think, you know, one of the things that concerns me a bit these days is the way that you know, it's sometimes hard to work intergenerationally, and that's why, you know, I'm involved with the Feminist Library, and I think it's so fantastic that we do work across generations. But the other thing I just wanted to say, just a little plug actually, was somebody was asking just before about 7-year-old feminists and things. And first of all, I was trying to be a 7-year-old feminist. It was very hard, and I had to wait quite a long time. And luckily for you, you don't have to wait quite so long because there is a women's movement now. So, and also to say though that we, our next event next Thursday, which is about Black women and books. And that's being co-facilitated by an organisation called Book Love, Samantha Williams of Book Love. And they have a fantastic array of multicultural books and books for, you know, for integrating, you know, Black women and young people and disabled young people and so on, and also to mention Letterbox Library that's been around since the year dot as well. So I think, you know, there are resources out there, and we should make use of them and not rely entirely on, I mean, I think Frida Kahlo was amazing, but not endless Frida Kahlo. There's many more of us out there.
To wrap this launch up, my last question, really simple question. Why did you write this book? What is your intention? Jane?
Well, I guess the idea has been there for a while, but I think we really got going on it about 2 years ago. And I think that was really in response to the feature film really coming to be truly, and we were beginning to hear more what it was going to be like. And it was exciting, but we did know that it wasn't necessarily going to be, well, it wouldn't be our story. And a lot of what we have in the book we've just done couldn't be in it. So that was part of it. Even in documentaries and audio documentaries that have been done, you know, it's different from what we've done here. So I think we all thought it was time to tell our story and the stories of other women.
Someone asked in the chat if we liked the film Misbehavior, and I really loved it. But also, I think it started us off thinking, because we met with the writer right at, you know, years and years before that, 2 years, and she said right at the beginning that she encouraged us that we should write something. Sorry, go on, Jane.
No, that's all. Yeah, I'm nodding.
Jo, Sarah, Jane.
But when we started it, you know, we'd no idea we were going to go through COVID. We've gone through COVID with this. We've done all this interconnection on the internet. We've done it, you know, through writing to each other, thousands and thousands of emails. You know, the way we've had to do it has been beyond belief. I'd never have thought that we'd have to get into this to do it. And then go through COVID. So COVID comes, just breaks out the same night as the film breaks out, is meant to break out. And then we've got to try and launch our book. It's COVID again, you know, lockdowns. We've just been through immense like hurdles, and it's brought us closer together. I mean, we've really had to sort of like go through a lot of, you know, far more than I ever imagined. Like when we set off, I kept saying this is a vanity project, because It didn't get any publishers. It wasn't going anywhere. It was, 5 old women went out one night 50 years ago and had a ball. So what, yeah, this was a bit different. And we had to like really, really dig deep into ourselves to find, really how to write. And that's been a learning process that we've done together. So again, this cemented us, brought our friendships together, and we've been through hell and back. And we're still alive and here now. Great.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jo. Jenny, yes, Jenny.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I completely agree with what Jo said. I mean, doing it under COVID was so hard. I mean, it's hard for everybody, isn't it? But it's that thing of not having any body language. They say body language is 90% of communication, and we just did not have that. We were these kind of flat images. But that wasn't what I wanted to say, and I've forgotten what I was going to say.
It's okay, right? It's okay, because you're with supporters and friends, and there's just so much.
I've remembered it.
I see. Oh, go on. Go ahead, Jenny. Go on.
Oh, very good, Nana.
The interesting thing is, I think it was Jane that suggested, look, over the years, there has been some stuff between us that we need to get out of the way. And, there's bound to be, isn't there, between all kind of long-term groups of friends. And I think it's interesting that we started a kind of consciousness-raising process, really, where we talked about what has happened to us since then, and I think we all cried, basically. Some of us were sobbing because we're women, with women's lives, and we're political women, and we've been up against it. And I think we've all been through some really, really tough stuff. And in sharing it, it helped us to write, as Jo said, to kind of dig down to the honesty. And I think the reason why we wanted to do this book fundamentally is that there's been a lot written and films made and TV programs and radio programs about that event, actually. For some reason, well, we know why, it caught the world's imagination. It was a symbolic event, and none of it really got to the truth of what we felt it was like to be there, to do it, to be in the women's liberation movement, to live in the way we lived, to choose our lives in the way we chose our lives. And I think we just wanted to really get at the feeling and the texture of what it was like. And so we, as Jo says, we dug down, we had to be honest, we had to expose some pretty vulnerable stuff, because that's kind of what the women's liberation movement was all about. And hopefully in the book, we really wanted to give that kind of texture and feel of what it was like to be there, and that's what we've aimed for.
Brilliant.
One of the best things was getting to find out the stories of other women who were there, who we didn't even know were there, just going through 70 Sisters networks and asking whoever we could. So to find like Val's story, for example, didn't know women who were not there and who were impacted by it. It was just a delight. I think we feel very lucky.
Would it be possible for any of the other contributors who are here, like I did notice Val before, to just wave or say something?
Excellent. I think Jo and Sarah.
Yeah, I think we haven't finished. I want to start again.
Yes.
We have not looked at the beauty myth. The beauty myth has us in its clutches. Women are very vulnerable. We feel vulnerable. We all look at our appearances in the mirror. We've got mirrors. We look, so we do think like, how am I going down? What can I do? We're all susceptible to it, and so we've got to fathom that. We've got to go into that and work out how. It's only through being together and working it through in ideas. But I think we have a lot more to do there to explore. It's unfinished.
Before we go to Val, Sarah, did you want to?
Yes, I keep trying to say something, but I'm always too slow off the mark. But well, yes, I mean, I agree with what everybody else said, but I think the film triggered off a lot of the desire for the book, because we had meetings with the scriptwriter and the director and everybody, and they were wonderful and very thoughtful. But they did keep saying to us, you realize we won't be able to put everything that happened into the film. And in fact, I think who we were was really amalgamated into about two main characters, which was Jessie Buckley and Keira Knightley. Keira Knightley having, doing the rattle, for example. I knew it wouldn't be, I did have a small, tiny, minute role in the film, but we wanted to tell the full story and also everybody else's story. So we advertised, we trawled, we looked high and low for everybody else who had been there and said, please, will you write something? And for a long time, it seemed like we were swimming against the tide, and we sort of thought, oh God, it's going to be so boring and worthy, this book. And then suddenly, miraculously, this year, under the strains of COVID, I don't know whether it was the challenge, but it all just seemed to, it was like a butterfly bursting out of a chrysalis. And it came together, and we found a wonderful person who helped us do the book, do the designer, who had actually lived as a child at the commune when he was 3 years old, and he's now a fantastic Morgan, fantastic with IT and photography and images, and he just brought it all to life. After all, but the COVID was such a challenge, and as Jenny said to me one time, we were discussing, and she said, here we are, we're all in our 70s, and we're having to do all of this through Zoom and online and learn all this stuff on computers and IT and everything. It really has been hugely challenging.
Excellent. Gail mentioned that Val is here. Val, do you want to say anything? Valerie, I'm just gonna, if you can unmute your. Perfect, thank you. Hi, Val.
Hi. Yes, I just want to echo what Jo was saying, really, that there's still so much to do, and the situation with young women being affected by the marketing and the sort of beautifying of everything has got so much more intense and so much more subtle. And the thing that's been striking me through at every level is the way through the COVID thing, and I've been involved in education, I've been involved in all kinds of things, but is the way all the information comes through statistics, and statistics don't tell you how different everybody is. And so everything that every institution treats people as if they're all the same. And in education, kids are put in the same class, they're classified, they put in, all that stuff, we all know it, and it's just going on more and more and more, and they're getting more sort of smarter about how to make us more uniform. And I think it's when we break out of that uniformity in whatever way we choose, it's really, really important not to be just a statistic, because statistics don't tell you anything about who people are. They're bringing out vaccinations, and they're going to give the vaccinations to very, 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 very diverse people, the same vaccination, and expect it to have the same effect. Well, it may not, it may have, nothing does. And it's the diversity of everything that I think is so important, and that we have to insist on our diversity and our difference, and that we can be, we can be totally connected but we don't need to be uniform, and we don't need to be the same. We don't need to look the same or act the same or think the same or take the same medicines or have the same education or anything. Then we need much, much more diversity. But I've just loved reading the book, and I would just, encourage everybody who's listening, just all the questions that you've asked are answered in the book, really. And it was, it's just been fabulous for me to read it again and hear all the you know, personal stories that I didn't really know in detail about anybody, and I've just loved it. So yeah, well, really well done, everybody. It was a fabulous thing to do. Yeah, and it's gone down in history. You know, it's there forever now. That is spectacular. Yeah.
Thank you, Val. Thank you, Val.
Thank you for being part of it.
Jenny Rathbone, your namesake Jenny Fortune is calling out to you. If you're here, unmute yourself. If not, I'm going to continue. I'll give you a few seconds. Is Jenny here?
Struggling to unmute. Yeah, a fantastic evening and fantastic book, because we have to remember that our kids won't know anything about this unless they've got the book and the film. So, you know, really great contribution. But there's so many things that we still have to be fighting for. What about period dignity? You know, nobody's mentioned that so far tonight. You know, there's been a huge outburst of creativity and protest and organisation around that, both for people in this country and also where we haven't really even touched on the problem in poor countries, where kids, you know, girls drop out of school because they haven't got any way of managing their periods. So there's so much to be done. One of the demands of the women's movement was free childcare, and where have we got on that? Absolutely nowhere. We are one of the worst countries in Europe for the provision of quality childcare. So there's so much more to be done, and it's get on with it time.
Brilliant.
So thank you very much for everything you've done tonight.
Thank you, Jenny.
Being part of.
Thank you, Jenny. Right. Thanks to everybody that turned up tonight. You could have been anywhere on the internet, right? But you chose to be with us. Make sure to buy the book, read these stories, respond to it. Be inspired to write and organise your own protests in your own lives. Give it to somebody for Christmas. Critique it if need be, but I just want you to engage with it. There are several themes, like Jenny Rathbone said in this book, that deserve more conversations and intellectual interrogation. And on that note, can I ask everyone to unmute themselves so we can clap for these wonderful women?
Clap for all of you.
No.
Can Maria unmute everybody?
are invincible. We are women.
Hey! That's brilliant. You're amazing. You're all amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Hey!
Inspiration. Inspiration. Solidarity.
Wonderful to
hear these women.
Oh my God.
Brilliant women. Fabulous.
Yeah, it's so lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nana.
That was brilliant. Thanks to all who organised. Great.
Orla on as well.
Take care, stay
See you
safe.
all in real life soon.